The reception that we got from people was, what the hell did you smoke? What exactly are you going for here? We were sort of hyped, and it was amazing because we had all of these experiences, but we didn't really manage to get that to the people. And so that was a turning point because
Simon Reber is the head of organizational development and leadership at Alpiq, a leading Swiss energy company with a background in transformation and strategic leadership. He's focused on shaping a culture built on trust, care, and authentic connection, rebuilding how people work and grow together from the inside out.
before, people were super anxious. Okay, so how is this going to go? And all of the questions, and a bit, oh no, it's going to be horrible. And now it's almost like you're going to a room with friends to have a discussion around something. And it starts with laughing, and people greet you, and a bit of banter in the beginning. It's just much less formal than it was before. And I think that, again, is a strong signal and has a strong effect on people. And that just immediately changes the vibe in the room.
I suppose a real test of this, when it works well, everyone's delighted with it, it's energizing, and it provides the psychological safety. But the test is when things go wrong, if people step out of line. Is there a sort of recognized mechanism to bring people back in? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, Simon. Welcome to The Power Between.
Hi, Roddy. It's a privilege to be here.
Simon, it's great to have you on the show. You are the head of OD, Organizational Development, for Alpiq, the leading Swiss electricity provider. And I became aware of you through an article, the recent issue of Developing Leaders Quarterly, practitioner journal that we publish. And this issue is on coaching. And there was an article by IMD professor Susan Goldsworthy, who I think you know quite well. And Susan wrote, in the words of Simon Reber, the care, dare, share philosophy is at the heart of Alpiq. Being rooted in caring, daring, and sharing helps us move past traditional notions of heroic leadership towards a much more human-centered, trust-based approach, essential in today's increasingly complex and uncertain business environment. And those lines sort of perfectly captured my and DLQ's approach to modern leadership. And I knew at that stage I needed to speak to this man. So I'm looking forward to delving into that and exploring it and seeing how you apply it in Alpiq. But perhaps before we do that, I always like to start with a bit of context and also the business context. Perhaps it'd be good, can you just tell us a little bit about what Alpiq does and your journey into your current role?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, again, it's a super privilege to be here. When I heard that quote, I'm like, wow. Sounds really good.
It's often good when people put your words together underneath the sentence.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so my name is Simon. As you said, I head the organizational development and leadership team here at Alpiq. What Alpiq is, a couple of words to that in a second. It's quite interesting how I got here, because that, in a way, also, I guess, frames a bit the approach that we have here. So I grew up in the Bahamas up until 11.
Not famous for its mountains or snow.
No, it doesn't really have both. Yes, but it does have some beautiful, oceans and other cool stuff. So I grew up there, came back to Switzerland. Still don't really fully understand why, but here we are. I studied piano. I classically trained pianist, then just from one moment to the next in my 20s stopped, because I thought, hey, there's more to life than practicing, and, wanting to do music versus having to do music is a bit of a difference. I then went to university and studied American literature, because books and literature was always a big thing for me, maybe potentially do the academic career. That didn't really work out. And then I ended up in a weird company where I stuck around for a couple of years that allowed me then to enter the energy business in Switzerland. So we have three big energy companies. One is BKW, Oxbow, and the third one is Alpiq. So I started at BKW in a role somewhere that then allowed me, because I had an interview with Antje, the current CEO of Alpiq, where she asked me, do you want to join my team? And I immediately said no, because I was so afraid and, sort of nervous around the whole thing. I slept on, and the next morning I called her back saying, hey, please forget the last 24 hours. Absolutely horrible. Of course, I want to join the team. And that was sort of the starting point of everything, because she places a lot of importance, energy, and focus on what is unfortunately called the soft skills. So everything that has to do, with values, working together, leadership, all that stuff. And she was a divisional head back then. So we did a lot of work around leadership and organizational development, but on a divisional level. And when she then became appointed CEO of Alpiq, I was privileged enough that she asked me, tag along. And of course, here I said yes immediately. I continued then, my journey here at Alpiq, but now on an organizational level. The story how I got here. And Alpiq is an interesting company because it is one of the 3 leading Swiss electricity producers and energy service providers that we have. I'm in Switzerland, but we're not only in Switzerland, but we are, across Europe. So we have locations in Spain, in Germany, the Nordics, Italy, Hungary. So we're all over the place. I think it's actually a very cool company because we have wonderful assets. We have a trading division. So we're an asset-backed company. And at the same time, from an organizational development point of view, it's awesome because, again, a lot of focus is placed on leadership development, on cultural development, and all of the things, that tie into this idea of how do we work together? What's our ways of working? How do we manage to be successful as teams, as individuals, and what does it need in order for that frame to work?
So that's I think that's interesting, though, because culture is so vital in allowing people to develop in different ways, and the culture of the organization will dictate how that happens. And so, you're very clear about that. Has Alpiq been a standalone company all the way through, or is it the result of different mergers? How does it come to its current?
So Alpiq is the result of a merger of 2 companies back in the beginning of the 2000s, and it used to be quite big. So for Swiss standards, at least, over 10,000 people. Currently, we are at roughly 1,300 or 50, something like that. And the reason for that is it went through a couple of rough years, and that led to also a bit of a reevaluation. What does success look like, and how can we as a company be successful? And that's sort of when Ante came onto the stage saying, hey, maybe we need to place a bit more or a lot of focus on, culture development and leadership, because at the end of the day, that's going to be our distinguishing factor, because we work with a commodity. There are a lot of things that we do that others can do. We are, of course, super good in flexibility. And at the same time, there are we're not the biggest player on the global energy market. So what is our differentiating, distinguishing factor? And that, we realized it boils down to our people, the way that we work, our values, our purpose. And from the very beginning, from Antje's sort of tenure here, we placed our purpose together for a better climate and an improved security of supply at the very, top of everything that we do, and everything that we do has to pay into that overarching sort of why. And so we said from the beginning, hey, we are a values and purpose-driven organization, meaning that we really, really try to not only have the way that we work on, posters and the wall and on, socks and T-shirts, whatever else, but that we really try to implement it day to day, have it in our, key HR processes, in the way that we evaluate each other, in the way that we work, in the way that we show up. And so that has been sort of the task from the very beginning, is how can we define that frame and how can we sustain that frame moving forward? And now the link to the quote that you mentioned is we realized back in 2022 that one of the key factors in making that happen is leadership. So we did the values by co-creating them with the people. So that was interesting. So the company values, there was a first version that came from the executive board, but we then went through workshops across the organization to deconstruct basically what the executive board came up with. And the people came up with some very different values than what the executive board had, but they were accepted, they were approved. And so the values that we have now were co-created by the people, for the people, from the people. And based on that, we said, okay, so we have the cultural frame. And so how are we going to push that into the organization? And the way that we're going to do that, it's going to be through leadership. And Antje did an EMBA at IMD, and she was always very strongly linked to also the philosophy of how IMD, sees leadership and does leadership. And when it came to the question of what leadership understanding do we want to sort of, build upon within the company, IMD was one of the, it was pretty quick that we arrived, hey, we want to do it with them. And so back in 2022, we did a sort of a week where the so-called top management, the 40, top managers that we have in the organization, including some wild cards, we went through a week of leadership training at IMD. And that was a very pivotal moment, because at the end of the week, we realized, okay, this is what we want to bring into the organization. This is the understanding that we want to bring into the organization. How are we going to do that? And so IMD bases, or we work together with Susan. Susan bases, her leadership understanding on the secure-based leadership philosophy, on this idea of caring, daring, and sharing. And we experienced it as these top 40 in that week by experiential activities, the way that we work together. And it was pretty amazing, because at the end of the week, we had a common language, and we thought, hey, we want to bring this language into the organization. And I say it this way because what we did was something different. We had this idea that, oh, this is super cool. We need to tell our people how cool this is. And we had the idea that we're going to send, all of us are going to send these very short videos to our organization, sort of on the intranet page, 30 seconds on our way home, how amazing this experience was, and that we want to bring this into the organization. And we did that. And the reception that we got from people, it was shortly after Christmas, was, what the hell did you smoke? I mean, this is weird. This is why, what exactly are you going for here? So the reception really wasn't what we expected. We were sort of hyped, and it was amazing because we had all of these experiences, but we didn't really manage to get that to the people. And so that was a turning point, because then we had to think about how are we going to bring this into the organization. And this is where this coaching centricity that we see at the center of our leadership understanding started to, that sort of was the inception of that. Because instead of working with external people, we realized we need the leaders to drive the organization. We need our managers to drive the organization, the transformation. And so we asked, out of these top 40, who would be willing, who volunteers to internally drive this. And internally drive means that these people would take over the leadership trainings internally for the next levels.
You're talking about the top 40 people here.
Yes, out of the top 40. These are executive board members and EB managers.
Okay. So, I mean, these are pretty senior.
Super senior people. And we asked them, so who will volunteer? And I was like, okay, so it would be good if we get like 3 or 4. I think we got like 19. So 19 of them volunteered. Wow. And they went through 50%. That was super nice. It was super nice. And again, was a bit anxious. Okay, so we have these people. What are we going to do now? So they went through a special sort of training that they get, the ideas of coaching principles. So how do you drive things like that? And again, together with Susan, they went through this mini training, and they then took over the next cohorts, the next trainings within the organization. So we then trained all of our line managers, roughly 200 people, but they weren't trained by external people. We trained them through these internal coaching ambassadors, is what we called them. So in addition to their day-to-day work, which is super important, of course, that they still did that, they took on this extra role of then bringing this care, dare, and share philosophy into the organization by taking over these trainings. And that had a huge effect, because people saw that we meant business by the simple fact that we wanted to drive it internally and not externally. We wanted to grow organically from the culture that we had, build up again on the values that we co-created, that these people then bring this into the organization. And they did this authentically. And authentically is interesting here because they were very vocal about the fact that this is a journey, that some of them, for them, it's going to be easy. For others, it's going to be not so easy, because it's all learned behavior. The expectations around, or this idea around care, dare, and share is not something that comes naturally. So it's a lot of learned behavior. And for people that have gone through their career based on what I call this sort of heroic leadership understanding, that you have the answers, that you tell people what to do, that this is where we're going, and now you go, towards this idea of, I don't have all of the answers. You are the subject matter experts. How can we create the space that you will bring your ideas, that you will challenge what is, speak up when it's uncomfortable, all of these things. Again, it's learned behavior. This is something that they need to rewire and to bring that to their people. And so they were very vocal about, okay, so we're not perfect. First of all, and we're also not executive coaches. We don't have a coaching certification. We didn't go through all of these trainings, whatever. but we are willing and we see the need and the desire to make that happen. And so that was sort of the genesis of that. And that was the beginning of really bringing Care, Dare, and Share into the organization.
When you came back from all the top cohort came back from the IMD and presented the new thinking, and it, you know, it clearly jarred as it landed. And I think that, I mean, that's a classic response to people going off on exec ed programs. They're brilliant, and you get immersed in them, and you get energized by them, and many people have a sort of epiphany, and they come back slightly evangelical about it.
Yeah,
those people who haven't been on on the program haven't done that journey, and they don't know what's going on. But so when, if you were to rerun those mini videos and stuff now, would it make much more sense, do you think, in the organization?
I think now, yes. I think now, absolutely. I think they were necessary the way that we did it back then, because they reframed the whole thing, or allowed us to think about, okay, so like you just said, the experience that we had, they did not have. The understanding of leadership that we got throughout that week of experiences together, they did not have. And so these videos triggered that discussion around how are we going to bring this language into the organization. I think now it would be totally different. And you see that. So the first cohort that we did back in 23 with all of these coaching ambassadors, we did them in the mountains. It was a super nice place. And you could feel tension in the room. So we had 4 cohorts, 50 roughly people for each of these cohorts. And so the first cohort was in September, and you could feel the tension in the room. What is this about? Why am I here? What are we going to do? Well, I had no clue what this secure-based leadership thing is. They had to watch some videos, which honestly, they're nice videos, but I guess they brought more anxiety into the system versus really helping. And so that was the start. If you look at how these trainings start now, so 2 years later, there's no longer that tension in that room, because people already know they know the language, they heard of Care, Dare, and Share, they hopefully see it, in their day-to-day with their managers and their leaders. And so it's more of, they're actually quite happy to be part of it now, because they can now also experience these trainings, which by definition, the trainings are a bit different to, I guess, normal trainings, because we don't have that much theory. You don't get a folder with, with models and methodologies and whatever else. It's more of it's a personal transformation growth sort of thing. You reflect more about yourself than about others, because we believe you need to start with your own, you need to connect to yourself before you can connect with others. So, and so that switch you realize now. That becomes quite tangible.
The classic leadership program always starts with a module on leading yourself, and leadership is so much about understanding how you behave yourself and being able to look in the mirror and do that. So I think what's really interesting there is that transfer and that change, that shift from 2 years ago to now. And what you're basically describing, I think, is there's much greater psychological safety in the room. I mean, people don't feel nervous about making themselves sort of, but going into a new situation is far less uncomfortable because of the shift that's happened, and that's an amazing transformation to have achieved.
Yeah, I think I do think that's quite cool. And again, with the disclaimer that it's learned behavior, and we still obviously have people on individual, points on that journey. Some are like super, at the very front, and they're role models, and they very vocal about the whole thing. And then you have others that potentially, have a bit more challenge to get there. And at the same time, that's cool, because we do have the sort of this community effect going on, where people start, supporting and giving feedback to each other around, hey, how can I help you? Or, what I just witnessed, maybe there could have been a different way that we could have done that. So there is this, connection between the leaders and also now the people, giving feedback around, okay, so maybe you could have done it this way, or this is how I can support you, or did you think about this? And I think that's actually quite nice, because there's a certain dynamic now in the room, and that in itself, again, drives the transformation even further.
And do you see, because of this, sort of a bit more truth to power? Are people challenging upwards more than they used to? Because that's often a real indicator that people are in it for the organization rather than necessarily for themselves.
Yeah. So I would love to say that you can see and feel that every single day, every time, which, to be very honest, I guess is not true. You can feel it and you can see it in a lot of meetings. And it may be different from division to division, but the element of challenging what is, I think, is there. I mean, it becomes clear already in the way that, for instance, the executive board meetings work. I think that, for me, that is one of the highlights, actually, after this, back in 2022. It's having gone through this experience together with the executive board, because they were present. They went through all of this as well. And they're also very vocal about the importance of it. The executive board meetings, which take place every 2 weeks, and when you go and pitch something, whatever else, it's an absolute switch to how it was before to how it is now. So before, people were, me particularly as well, were super anxious and, okay, so how is this going to go, and all of the questions, and a bit, oh no, it's going to be horrible. And now it's almost like you are, and this may sound a bit weird, but it's almost like you're going to a room with friends to have a discussion around something. And it starts with, laughing, and people greet you, and there's a bit of banter in the beginning. And then you sort of, it's just much less formal than it was before. Not informal in the sense that no decisions are made, but just the way that discussions are being held are much, much different. And I think that, again, is a strong signal and has a strong effect on people, because they can see that you can have serious discussions within a bit more of an informal frame. And that just immediately changes the vibe in the room. It changes the atmosphere in the room. It changes how, discussions are held. And I think pockets like that you can see all over.
And do you think that brings issues that might otherwise have been suppressed more quickly to the surface?
Yeah, absolutely.
The more transparency.
Absolutely. And I think that's the brilliance of this very simple seeming model of care, dare, and share, because a lot has been invested on the caring part. So this idea of building these secure bases, and very important here, it's not about being nice, but being kind. There's a lot of work by Amy Edmondson. You can Google it, and there's a lot of LinkedIn and whatever. But this idea that you want to also give courageous feedback to people, because you feel that they can grow from that, but it comes from a space of respect and unconditional positive regard. So there has been a lot of work done because of all of the trainings, because of the ambassadors, because all of these line managers that, are really trying to visibly live that people, there is this secure base within the organization. Not everywhere as strong, but there's an element across the entire organization around, being able to be vulnerable, showing up as your best self, so on and so forth. And built up on that allows then the daring to happen, to give that courageous feedback, to challenge what is, to go against limiting beliefs that people potentially may have, to unlock potential where other people's potentially see limits. But the caring part was necessary. And that's why I think also Susan always emphasizes there's no such thing as care or dare. It's care and dare. You need to have the one for the other to happen. And so the investment in the caring, I mean, in our trainings, people need to draw their lives. They need to explain to each other where they come from, their highlights, their lowlights, what are their wishes, what are they afraid of. So it's a lot of, again, it's a lot of work on themselves, and that might seem a bit, scary in the beginning. But the benefit of it is that people get to know each other much, much better. You get to make links between people that you up until then thought, I have zero connection to this guy or this woman. I don't know who this person is. But then through these stories, you will realize, hey, this person went through very similar things, or this person operates very similar to me. And that allows for a level of trust to happen within smaller bubbles, but also in bigger teams, that you can then build upon for the benefit of then being able to have those courageous conversations, to give that, to that courageous feedback to that particular person, because you want them to grow, and the other person knows, hey, this person has the best interests, at heart. And so he or she wants to help me. So I think this has changed because of the work that we have done on care.
And so what's the rhythm of this? I mean, that cascading that happened originally of getting people to become internal coaches and learning the coaching process and involving themselves in the care, dare, share routine. Once that's done, Is there, are the touch points that you work on throughout, or has it just become a sort of environment that imbues this?
Yeah. So the goal is to have the environment, and I think we're on a very good track to get there, because I strongly believe change will only sustainably happen if you anchor it in, structurally. And so what we have done is we had these coaching ambassadors. They have committed to being role models. They have taken care of these trainings, but we only have so many line managers, right? So after in 2024, last year, we already realized that sort of the people that go through these trainings, they're not all line managers anymore. So leadership, we started to broaden to this idea of, people that need to take decisions, people that are subject matter experts. So it's a broader understanding of leadership. And so these leadership trainings become, in 2024, we're maybe 2/3 line managers and 1/3, our super talents, key profiles, experts, senior experts, whatever. And now this year, it's roughly 50-50. So new line managers, but also experts and whatever else. And so that's the training stream. And we realized there's a big need for actual coaching, the coaching capability. And again, we did not want to go externally. We want to build that up internally. So out of all of these volunteers that did the coaching ambassadors, we selected 6 people that went through, again, an IMD, IECC training to become executive leadership coaches, so like the real thing, so that we can also offer true executive coaching, not only to leaders, but to our organization. So we can do team coaching, we can do one-to-one coaching. And we realized that this is something that is actually desired by the organization, that there's an actual need for this. So we're leveling that up. So we have 2 more people now going through the training. There were more people that will go through that. And this becomes interesting because the coaching capability now we can use everywhere. And so for new leaders that join the company or people that are promoted to a line manager role, they get now a sort of a transitional coaching. We don't call it mandatory, but strongly encouraged. That sort of in the first 3 months, you have 3 to 4 coaching sessions, so that the person, your coachee, can start, to think about, who are my stakeholders, who do I need to talk about, can reflect on what has brought me here, potentially is not going to bring me further, what behaviors are, can I build on, what are my strengths, all of these questions. And that really, we can see a change because that is something that we didn't have before. So we can really individually then cater towards the needs of these new these new line managers, these people that have been promoted, and they again can spread that within the organization. So that's sort of one thing that we started to change. We also started to really think about structurally anchoring this in key HR processes. So how does performance management work? Moving away from this moment of, again, heroic leadership. I am telling you, Roddy, that this year you need to do this, and this, and that. And by the end of the year, let's evaluate how well you did. And then what happens is at the end of the year, you had no clue what I told at the beginning of the year. I have no clue what I told you. And we sort of think about, okay, what were the goals, right? And we're shifting that towards this understanding of, hey, it's a continuous discussion, where the person should bring in his or her own ideas of where he or she wants to develop, of course, within the frame of our purpose and our org goals and whatever else. But it's a conversation. It needs to be a dialogue. It's not prescriptive, right? It's something that needs to happen. And that is very strongly linked to coaching principles. And so for us, the care, dare, and share model is now very strongly linked to this idea of coaching principles that, independent if you are an executive coach or if you are a leader, a team leader, or a top manager, or even an employee, these coaching principles can be relevant for you and should be relevant for you. And that's why we want to spread this across the organization and anchor it as well as we can structurally in our recruiting process, in the way that we do performance management. And it changes the way that leadership is understood. This shift, as you mentioned in the beginning, from heroic leadership, from one person knowing everything, to post-heroic leadership, and stop worrying and trust the collective, the collective intelligence that there is,
which is historically or sort of in terms of human evolution, how humans have best worked in relatively small groups where we are responsible to each other. But I mean, I suppose a real test of this, when it works well, everyone's delighted with it, and it's it's energizing and it provides the psychological safety. But the test is when things go wrong, if people step out of line. Is there a sort of recognized mechanism to call people back, bring people back in? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I would like to emphasize it's learned behavior. So even though this all sounds super nice, and I do think we are on the right track, there's a lot of stuff happening around that you need to have the conversations. So a lot of courageous conversations happening, but it's good because we sort of established that's a thing. So, it's not that weird anymore. If you ask a person, hey, we need to have a courageous conversation, the other person already knows, okay, so this is going to happen. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. Nonetheless, I think, low performance from a perspective of goals, I think is something that's super established and very clear. If you continuously don't manage to reach your goals, then there's this, this idea of a low performance process where you think about, okay, how can we help this person to perform better, whatever else. And then potentially over time, it doesn't work. The consequence could be that you let go of that particular person. But that has always been sort of based on the what and never on the how. And so what we have realized after 2 years, potentially a bit too late, but still, it's a learning journey. After 2 years is, what do we do with people that visibly do not adhere to the principles, that are very vocal about, hey, this is all nice and well, but in my team, I'm going to do it differently. And there we realized we need to have not something super complex or complicated, but we need to have something, a process around behaviors. Expected behaviors that we want to see, versus behaviors that we really do not want to see within the organization. And there we came up with this process, which we call the cultural alignment process. Maybe not the best name on the planet, but it's what we were running with. And the idea there is that we want to make it clear to people that as important as the what is, equally important is the how. And so here as well, we have a simple process around having that conversation with that particular person. If you feel a person is out of line, but you need to have it, in the moment. And if that doesn't work because due to, power struggles or, you don't feel comfortable, then there's a process around going to that particular person's line manager, involving HR. But we also make it very clear that if there is no change seen over a certain period of time, then the how can also lead potentially to us letting people go, because you have a choice, right? You have a choice. We have values, we have leadership principles. There is a way that we want our ways of working, just to be. And so you have a choice to be part of that. And if you realize, hey, this is really not something that I can adhere to or I don't feel comfortable with, then I guess you are going to be way, way happier someplace else.
Well, yeah. That's how it works, isn't it? And you become isolated.
Yeah. Well, you need to make that explicit. And I think what's important, it's a very thin line between making this explicit and this thing around cultural police, which I think is horrible, which really you don't want to go there, right? It's not like, oh, you did not do this according to this, and that. But it's about, hey, this is the frame, and within its frame, you can operate as freely as you want to, but we do have some non-negotiables. And yes, it can happen, and then we can have a conversation, and then things can change. But if over time things doesn't change, then hey, maybe you're going to be, maybe someplace else will be, the better place to be.
You've given a really clear explanation of how it's evolved and where it came from, and it started at the top and has cascaded down. Yeah. Do you have a sense of how it's viewed from the ground up, from the grassroots up? And has that sort of significantly changed or altered the employee value proposition? I mean, do people think this is... Well, I think actually I read somewhere in Susan's article too that you've won one of the great places to work accolades. Yeah. So presumably yes is the answer to my question.
So it's a very good question. And just to emphasize what you just said earlier, I think it owns a cultural transformation like this, even though it started small and it's now for our size, a big cultural transformation. It only works if the executive board is part of it, because we've also heard of other companies where the EB says, okay, we need to do this, but they're not part of it. And then it's not going to work because they don't speak the same language. But that's just sort of as a side remark. We have been tracking from the very beginning, 2022, I can't speak for before because I wasn't here, employee engagement rates, survey scores. At the beginning, a bit of an overkill. We said, hey, organizational feedback is important every 3 months. We're going to send out a pulse check and then whatever. And then we realized after a year, every 3 months is just way too much. People are just, they're not going to fill it in, or it's not going to be, what can we do with every 3 months? And so we switched that to every 6 months. And once a year, we have this Great Place to Work survey that, pays into actually being then certified, yes or no. There's certain expectations that you need to meet to get that. And we've been tracking the employee engagement scores, the employee net promoter score and the leadership scores and so on and so forth. And since 2022, they have dramatically risen. So we see both in the quantitative answers, which is nice, but for me, more important, I guess, are the qualitative. So we have a couple of open, text fields where people can write stuff. And there, since a couple of years in the positive feedback box, there's a lot of, feedback around secure-based leadership, the change that has come with that. So it's something that we hear from people, that this is actually a thing that they can feel and that they can see in their day-to-day. Again, it's not always perfect. We also get feedback, hey, my manager isn't adhering to it and whatever else. And again, that's something that we need to work on. The thread is very clear, and it's not like only 30% of the organization takes part in these surveys. So you need to have at least, I think it's like 65 or 70% to actually be eligible for the Great Place to Work certification. Okay. There's a lot of people that participate. So it is a data set that you can actually work with, and that is representative. So it does tell us that we're on the right path. The feeling is that it's there, and you hear it in the language. And I think that's a cool thing. People start using the terminologies. They use this caring, daring, and sharing. And what used to be a bit of a struggle, to get that right in 2022 now comes much more naturally. And I think that in itself shows that the system is changing.
And in terms of corporate results, is there a robustness that you can associate to this too?
Yeah. So when Antti does her presentations around this, there's always a slide. So what's the impact? And the impact is what I just said, the engagement and leadership scores that are up, the Great Place to Work certification that we got, the Best Practice Award that we just got a couple of weeks ago, and then the best financial results 23 and 24. And of course, it's all the holy grail metric around how does this all pay into all of that. I think every company is searching for that.
Sure.
And at the same time, I think it's very clear that if your people are happy and they're engaged, then your results will be better, right?
It's hard to argue against that, but correlation is not causation directly, but indirectly, it would seem very odd if the two weren't connected, which is absolutely at the heart of sort of human-centered leadership, is that if we treat people so that we value the input that they're making and allow them to take responsibility and show initiative and collaborate more freely, perhaps.
Yeah,
that increases engagement. And that's the underpins, I think, the care, dare, share philosophy. The big change has perhaps happened. So the initial wave has coursed its way through the organization, and you've shifted culture. What do you need to do to maintain it?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. There are a couple of answers to that question. So what I believe, or what we're working towards, and we just got acknowledgement from the executive board that we can go this way, is we are ramping up the amount of executive coaches that we have. So currently we have 6. We have 2 people going through the training. We will have roughly 3 to 5 more that will go, so that we have really a sort of a network of internal coaches, so that we can use them for everything. And I think that's going to be very important. In addition to that, the coaching ambassadors, so not the coaches, but the coaching ambassadors, so those people that have driven this transformation so far, that's an amazing community and an amazing network, because they're all across all levels, they're across all of Alpiq, all locations. And here we pitched, wouldn't it be nice to reach sort of 16% of the organization? So roughly 120 to 30 people, to have a community of 120 to 130 people that by sheer being part of that community commit themselves to visibly sort of living that within their small or bigger circles of influence. So they become multipliers. And I think that's super necessary and important because they are, again, they're across Alpiq. They will see things that, headquarters or HR or we will never see. And they can then bring that change into their own space. And we meet up every month. We have a coaching monthly. We have twice a year. We have a physical get together where we coaches, I'm one of the executive coaches, where we pass on, coaching principles, knowledge that we received from IMD, knowledge from the coachings that we have around actively listening, presence, all of these things. We pass them on to them so that they can pass that on again to their teams. And I think the coaching ambassador network is going to be important because if you have over 100 people, we're currently at 50, they're everywhere. And so because they're everywhere, they can also intervene or emphasize or underline or jump in or support or whatever, because they're everywhere. And I think that's going to be very important for sustaining the change because they're the ones that actually drive it. And in addition to that, we have, goals that we want to reach in terms of, KPIs, but also goals in terms of how many coaching hours or, how do we're constantly changing the training landscape so that it doesn't become a training just for line managers. We are, dabbling a bit with different formats. I just did a podcast series in a way with Susan around secure-based principles, not secure-based leadership. So the principles that we are then going to offer as part of the onboarding for all Alpiq employees, because it's not just about leadership. Presence is something that is important for employees generally. How can you be more resilient? We believe that breathing, for instance, is something that's super important. So we have extended breathing sessions that we offer, stuff like that. So we try.
How does that get taken up? Is that?
Oh, that's very good question. Breathing. So
that back to the what have you been smoking issue?
So here we have people that are super into it, and then people that go like, I really don't know what you're doing. Because and what we do there is persistence. So all of the leadership get-togethers that we have, I always start with a 2-minute breathing exercise that we call internal weather, where people need to start breathing, think about their internal weather, and then explain to the others how they feel. So we try to put it everywhere so that it becomes, again, a sort of a natural thing. Because breathing is awesome, in difference to maybe meditation, which I personally am very bad at because my brain goes everywhere and I just simply can't focus on the nothingness of the moment or the everything of the moment. Breathing helps me because I can start counting, right? It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, I see that is also slowly but surely changing. But yeah, there needs to be certain willingness and openness from the people to go there. And again, there's people that are willing and others that are not so much. We continue one step after the other.
Creates one final question for me. How do people find the time, carve out the time, maintain the time to do this? Because often the issue with all these kind of soft skills or super skills on how we want to brand them, but is they're not mission critical. They don't get the transaction across the line today, which may be required. So they can always be pushed off down the line, and then ultimately they get pushed so far that it never happen. So how do you police, for want of a better word, that people are putting the time in to do this?
So that is, again, a very good question. And here, this is something that Antje repeatedly does, our CEO. She says, as leaders, you can pretty much delegate everything apart from leadership. Fundamentally, if you are a leader, that comes with certain expectations and with certain requirements. And leadership, the actual task of leadership, is at the very heart of that. And so we've been emphasizing this since 3 years now, that if this is the path that you want to take and you don't want to be an expert or whatever else, if you really want to go down the path of being a leader, then that entails that you need to have time to do this. And that entails that you need to think about how are you going to get that time. And I guess this is a hope, as many other companies, we have an issue with too many meetings, and we have all over the place meetings. And so again, there is the thinking about how can we maybe repurpose meetings or kick them out or, think about meetings differently that allows us to then bring elements of leadership, into these segments, to repurpose things that already are there in order then to use them for something different. And again, here is learned behavior. It's some are already very good and they have really dedicated, they have their blockers, they dedicate the time to the development of the people and, care, dare, and share, whatever. And then there's others where it's a bit more difficult. And here it's really about having those conversations, coaching, all of the stuff that we can offer in order then to hopefully take that next step. But time and resource is a big thing because, it's a complex world. It's crazy. Things are changing so fast. How do you take the time to dedicate?
A really critical point that frequently we don't discuss. Some people are more suited to leadership than others. I read a great phrase in a book we're publishing by a coach at the moment, Like a Leader, but many people's strengths lie in areas far removed from leadership. And I think there's this expectation that if you want to get on in an organization, you have to move into a leadership role.
Yeah.
You can be a subject matter expert, you can be a whatever. And leadership does require this time and this sort of space creating ability, which is often people want to be doing.
Or at Alpiq, or I guess generally, you used to or still do, if somebody's doing a good job and you want to promote them, you promote them to a leadership role. And so the best person in the team then becomes the leader of that particular team. But maybe that person doesn't really they're not happy with the job that comes with that and would rather focus on whatever expertise that he or she had before. And that is also a continuous discussion. How can you then offer these two career paths where both are also in a way equal, that the senior expert, also brings a lot of value and impact to the organization and is also seen from a status perspective as, the super awesome person and not only the person that has, 16 people that he or she is leading, right?
Simon, that was brilliant and fascinating. Get you back in a year's time and find out where Alpiq has taken it. But for now, Simon Reber, thank you very much indeed.
Roddy, thanks a ton.